Hello and welcome to the Geek on My Sleeve channel. Today we are doing our 44 Geek Out session, talking about Heaven's River, which is the fourth book in the Bobiverse book series by Dennis E. Taylor. Quick little, can't even think of the word, blurb. I'm going to try to keep music going in the background. If you feel as if I should adjust the volume and you can't clearly hear me or it's a distraction, just go ahead and give us a heads up. I like to see if I can make this work.
Yeah, always trying to break things, right? And after putting out our last Geek Tip video, figured we'd give it a shot. Bit of background noise to help keep things moving along. So that being said, if you're new, spoilers ahead. We're on Bobiverse Book 4. I am so excited to finally come back to this series. It's one of our earlier ones. It's actually one of our more popular ones on their channel. And yes, been waiting for what seems like forever for the Search for Bender, the working title, published title, Heaven's River, to come out. So happy that unlike a lot of other books out there, they actually came out with the Audible production first. Ray Porter is amazing.
He's one of the few who has a direct, forget the verbiage, but he says, I'll only go through Audible, and Audible says, okay, we'll promote your product.
Yeah. I was watching it day one. It ranked pretty high there on sales. I don't remember if it ever hit 1, but definitely made top 5. And been following the Reddit. At one point, I don't know about you, but I felt originally the first 3 books wrapped up really well as a trilogy. And I think that's about as far as he was going to go originally. And then we got announced books 4 and 5. But I most recently saw a post on Reddit where I believe it was Dennis E. Taylor himself responding to a tweet talking about in relation to will there be a book 5? He's like, yes, and a 6, and a 7, and an 8. And after getting through this book, seeing how everything gets set up, I really want to do some theory crafting at the end there because
your hand keeps phasing out.
Yeah.
Anyway, side note, I forgot to click this. Please enjoy. All right, that comes through a little louder. Apologies. So on that topic, book 3 wrapped up the series beautifully. Is a nice conclusive end. We've saved humanity from the threats that we know of. Book 4, at first, I didn't enjoy it as much because it did it differently, and it didn't really feel um, it didn't feel the same because 1, 2, and 3 we had like a direct, correlation. Hey, here's the threat. This is how we're dealing with it. This is why we're building replicants to handle this process because we can only handle so much. Book 4, after I really got the whole we can go off and do whatever, like it was Bob going and finding one of his original clones, so that made a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I think it does well setting up for going forward.
Yeah.
And it just brings up one of those weird questions. And I think it's a line in book 3 where, or maybe it's 1 or 2. Anyway, they're talking about how maybe I should just bring replicants up to speed from the old backups. Like I still have the backup I made you from, blah, blah.
Bring them up verbally or whatnot.
Yeah, the sugars around the lip of the glass or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. My first take on book 4 was it didn't quite have the same feel for me, but after getting through it and going back and re-listening to it again, I kind of shift my perspective, and think about it as if like it's the next trilogy, right? Like books 1 through 3 pretty much wrapped up the others. We at first had the Brazilians, then we had the others in 2 and 3. We survived that, and now there's no threat uniting the Bobiverse. And book 4 really kind of sets us up for a lot of those future threats, right? We now have the different factions with Starfleet, the Skippies. There's also a lot of other little minor factions with the gamers, and a couple of the other different groups. In addition to, there's some foreshadowing there with some of the greater threats. I think it was Bill and Bob were doing a bit of talking about how, I think it was also Riker brought it up about this larger threat, right? Like we have been able to handle all these other alien species, but there's just too many coincidences about like the timing of the different species. And they're talking about like within thousands of years of each other.
Yeah, which they didn't come out and directly say it, but what it made me think of is like the Big Bang Theory, where we kind of all, atoms came together or whatever, and then we all kind of happened at once. So each of the different planets are developing more or less from go. They all started about the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then also another coincidence that I caught this last time listening through again, which I'm kind of curious to hear what people think about, is we know that Bob 1 or 1.0 is around 300-ish years. So that's when all the von Neumann probes kind of got sent out between the 5 different nations. The Quinlans basically had their major catastrophe around the same time too. Because at one point they said that they've been on Heaven's River for approximately 300 years when they're talking to the artificial intelligence at the end there. So it kind of makes me wonder, is that just a coincidence that humanity kind of saw its ending chapter on Earth around the same time that the Quinlans had their final chapter on their homeworld? In addition to potentially the larger species out there, alien life. Go ahead.
So one thing that I hope he eventually addresses is Guppy, because I want to say it was either 2 when they're on, Romulus, the one with the dinosaurs, and they essentially set up a AIM Amy controlled guppy unit, and they allow the processing of the Amy with the command structure and being able to delegate with the guppy. And I really thought that was going to expand and take off. Never did. In 4, we get a lot of hints of the black box testing, essentially, the equivalent to the Chinese room type deal, where you give it an input and you see results and you see if he's developed a personality. And that's something I wish we got more of, but it's okay. I'm excited to see going forward with the Skippies and their AIs and combining forces. Yeah,
it's really interesting. In a lot of ways, like this book we were talking about as we were getting ready for this stream, where in the other books 2 and 3 were all over the place, right? Following the different descendants, dealing with all these big challenges. In book 4, we spend a big chunk of our time on Heaven's River, and in a lot of ways it was a lot of fun. Like, it was more of the Delton feel, kind of like Bob's original storyline there, that I enjoyed, and yet we got to do kind of like a deeper dive with it, right? And we get a lot of go ahead.
Another odd point you get to see is Bob originally had a lot more time discovering the Delton language, but then when we come to the Quinlans, or I forget what else they call them, they didn't have as much time and it was more rushed. And so that's where a lot of he gets found out, and the oddities of the gravity and a couple other slip-ups where he's like, oh, I thought the translation software had this, but I didn't give enough time to figure everything out.
Yeah. And in a way, as I was going back and thinking about this a little bit too, it was the Skippies that ended up doing the translation, right? And most of them, the Skippy faction, they no longer communicate as ephemerals do. They end up like transferring packets of information. The analogy Hugh uses is they pretty much like use sign language instead of verbal communication. So while it was nice that they kind of like delegated that out and they took that over, if you think about it from their perspective, they don't necessarily process information all the time like ephemerals do. So some of those nuances and the colloquialisms or whatever may not be as incorporated because they're just transferring data packets, right? It ends up...
In their defense,
go ahead.
Their method of extracting the data was a little different because they essentially wanted to use SUDAR, like they use a laser to determine distance based off of how it bounces back and find the vibration off of a hard surface such as glass. But due to the Quinlan lifestyle, that wasn't a valid choice. That wasn't able to work out as they wanted. And I feel like it was just because it was rushed, even though the Skippies deal with data differently. I don't think that was the hurdle. Okay.
Yeah. With any of this, guys, feel free to chime in and contribute in chat if you feel like we're completely off base here. But yeah, it was kind of fun seeing all the different generations come together and get united over this one project. As much as they were talking about replicant drift and the Bobs going their own way and not even appearing to be Bobs anymore, they all kind of united with the exception of Starfleet for the Quinlan project, right? The gamers were interested in the challenges of breaking in. The Borg, I don't remember if the Andrew. Yeah. I forget the two guys' names who are working on that other project, but do you remember the section about that other Manny where it was pretty much like a bunch of interlinking like ant bodies?
Those are the guys who brought the other's vessel to save the
Mm-hmm.
humans at the
Mm-hmm.
end of 3. I can't remember their name.
I think they're like 8th or 9th generation too. So like a couple
They
books
used to be
back.
on Scum, but now
Yeah,
they're
yeah. Now they're like on the top half of the family tree, right? Because we get into the mid 20s generations. And who knows, potentially even more because of all the different Bobs that are just kind of out and about and not on the radar anymore, right?
well.
Um,
That's something that's interesting because a lot of the conflicts come in this book come about because there is no rigid, solid structure. There's no government. There's no laws. There's no
mhm,
rules. It's more a mentality of saving the human race, which is the same thing that the Quinlan AI is trying to do. Now, it came
mhm,
up to a undesirable conclusion from our perspective of essentially de-evolving them so that they don't kill themselves. But then that still leaves a single point of failure where they're all contained in Heaven's River. We give them all an alternative of spreading them out.
did we ever establish that that was intentional or not? I don't think that.
Yeah, we did. Because that was his whole God in the Sky routine when Bob
Mm,
and not Skippy, it's
Hugh,
Q. Yeah, when
Hugh,
Bob and Hugh are leaving Heaven's River after they've
hmm
talked to the AI. The AI does this heaven in the sky business where he's
right,
like, all right,
right,
I've been taken over for 300 years, and it's due to talking to this alien race. It's not going to be okay. I can't remember the quote exactly, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we figure out that that was his plan.
I remember the whole like God in the sky piece, but I still don't think it was intentional. I know that his main goal was survival. So he was doing what he could to, scatter, minimize, like do all that stuff. But my takeaway, and again, as always, would love your guys' comments and feedback on this as well. But I thought it was like an unintentional consequence of it all. That he wasn't intentionally trying to de-evolve them. It was just part of the process. The fact that his goal was survival.
Okay,
So
yeah.
like he moves them around, he scatters them, he tries to keep them alive, limit
Yeah, I think
the
it was
ways to kill them
escalated
off.
to that, but
hmm which kind of makes you think, a lot of parallels to just humanity as well. The challenges that we face and what we strive for kind of pushes us to progress. And then you give the species, no challenges, nothing but sunshine and fresh fish. And there's no need to strive anymore, right? They just go out into the countryside and live their lives.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
in which that's I understand why everything had to happen the way it did, and it makes a lot of sense after the fact. But I was a little disappointed we didn't get to see more Bridget's side of things because I
I'm with
really
you.
enjoy the kind of counterpoint or different view from Bob's. Like even different Bobs have differing views, but she went more analytical on things, and she would have been
hmm
focusing on different things. But that wasn't our focus. This was Bob's journey to save a descendant of his who, yeah, we didn't know what happened. But
hmm
throughout the story, we realize there are a lot of Bobs or a lot of replicant clones that are doing just that, where they're just pointing one direction and taking off and doing whatever.
hmm
So that's going to be kind of a different story. I'm curious to see the continuation because Dennis could go a million different directions on this. He could
Yes.
start a whole separate side series where one of them that got off and did their own thing He could do a whole like snapshot generational thing. This was our terraforming project. This was our life that we saw
Yes.
individually.
Yes.
I don't see him going in that direction. I see him more dialing in and focusing on the Bob, the 1.0 or 2.0, or sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Bob 2.0, where he's going to be doing things and we're going to get to see the AI advance, and we're going to get to see other differing factors like how the humans react after the whole Starfleet incident.
Yeah, the fallout there. There's a lot of tension there. And the Pav and the Quinlans taken to the stars, and the different Bob factions, and the ones that are like trying to do right by the humans, and the other factions like Starfleet that think they should just not participate at all. Um, but another thing I wanted to touch base on before I forget, with the replicant drift, how much of it do you think is actual drift like they talk about, and how much of it is just their own individual experiences up to this point, right? Because if you go from,
We talked about that in the previous ones.
yeah, but even more so now because we're at 300 plus years out, right? So
Yeah.
like literally 10 times subjectively, if you don't frame jack, of experiences beyond that point, right? So how
Yeah.
much does like the average Joe grow and change and perspective shift on things?
Well, there are a couple of good points there for. Oh, lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, I was talking about how when a Bob clones, because they are reluctant to clone or replicate, it is due to an environmental pressure, and that is a big direction for why they are created. It's like, hey, I've got X amount of tasks, I need them handled because I can only
Mm-hmm.
divide my processing so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So they come out, and they know that's their direction and that's their feel. But then since the others have been dealt with and that's not a direct, tension, they have a
Mm-hmm.
little more variety and a little more freedom to do whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And just some of the pushback with like the original, not really rules, but like policies in place. Original Bob kind of got some pushback, and Bill got some pushback with the senior Bob and the system being in charge, sort
Yeah,
of a deal.
that wasn't gonna last.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of shifted a bit. They've gotten a bit better at doing the collab pieces. Um,
Another thing I wanted to see more of was humans using the manis in other spots, or humans being able to get the VR stuff to interact with the moots,
we
and other
saw a
things.
couple, but
Yeah,
not a
but
lot.
tip
I'm
of the
with you.
iceberg.
Like I was
And
really hoping we would see more of that. Same with like Bridget, like you said earlier, seeing more of her. Like those first couple chapters there were a lot of fun, having that dynamic.
but in a way, it all made sense because, like, I wanted more just because I found that interesting, but at the
Mm-hmm,
same time, it had to happen the way it did, because if the scut wasn't down, then Bob would have been able to do a lot more. He would have been able to have other people, deal with the manis, find resources, build more drones, do
mm-hmm,
all this extra,
mm-hmm.
and it would have changed the story as a whole. But
Yeah,
due to the limiting factors of that, and Hugh coming over and directly helping, and these other things, that's how the story really develops.
yeah.
Because, it's like a James Bond thing where you're cut off from everybody and you've got to infiltrate and, you
Mm-hmm.
know, handle it in the real.
Yeah. I found that pretty funny when they switch up the language like for in real, just to
Yeah.
get how life progresses and abbreviations come about. So I know we talked about how you only listened to this one, I think it was like 3 or 4 times before this stream, and usually you like to do more, so it's not always the easiest to remember that first read through. But as you were going through it the first time, what were some of like kind of your guesses or things you picked up on the foreshadowing and thought, were like the puppet masters or whatnot? I know for myself early on, granted, I didn't have the time to go back through and re-listen to all the first three trilogy or the first three right before doing this one. I just kind of like jumped into it. But as the Bobiverse was kind of having some of their struggle there, I couldn't help but reflect on some of the Bobs like Thor, who at the end of book 3 kind of like stepped up and said, hey, we're done being humanity's lackeys, right? Kind of like pushing back and wondering, like, is he one of the big players in the background? And I'll admit, I was completely off base, but early on during my first read through, I couldn't help but think, like, was Riker, maybe it's too much of a direct connection between Starfleet and Riker being from Star Trek, but part of me wondered, like, man, is Riker, just got pushed to the point, because we always wonder, like, they joke about like a psychopath Bob coming about, right, with the replicant drift or just like snapping or whatever. Like, was he so burned by his experience with humanity that he's finally like pulling some of the strings in the background to be like, you know what, we just need to sever ties here.
No.
But he ended up kind of going a completely different direction, where he teamed up with, I don't think it's Marvin, I forget the Pond Scum, as they refer to themselves, to take their descendants and go off and do their own thing, which, as we continue to have these time hops, could that be a whole different branch of humanity? And the Bobs always kind of favoring them if they get set up in their own system compared to these other ones, as you have, all these different factions come about with the Pav, the Humanity, the Johansons, and, what they got going on. Because, like, they could easily become so much more technologically superior than the rest of humanity, because the rest of humanity is pretty much walled themselves off from the Bobiverse. So if Bob's descendants don't,
but I feel there's still going to be a layer of connectivity, because as of now,
they need stuff.
Yeah, well, they can take over their own auto factories. They can build their own, I forget what Bill's name for his super base of backups and transmitting power for moots and whatnot, and how the living pay and blah blah blah. I see the Skippies and the AIs and the technology that we got from the Quinlan artificial intelligence scaling and just progressing super quick, and all that cool technology there.
Sure.
I was a little disappointed that, like, we, at the end of 3, we literally vaporize the others, but it's only to the point of like organic matter, the way we saturated them with all the radiation. Now, it could have played havoc on some of the electronic components, but like, we didn't really touch on that. We were like, oh yeah, we've upgraded our roamers and we got them better equipment, and we found this out from the others, and it was just kind of like, yeah, we did this. But I felt like they outclassed us in so many other ways, and that we didn't really touch on it. So I'm hoping going forward with this new AI and this new technology, we're able to diverge more.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, the foreshadowing for book 4 leads us to believe, as we get further and further out there, we're finally going to meet that master race, right? One of the ancient races that is just like so much more technologically advanced than the rest of the little species we've come in contact with.
Well, Well, it's all going to be like at their disposal. And I, sorry if I lose anyone here. There's another book series that we listen to that is Children of Time. And it more or less is apocalyptic end of humanity, and we send out to populate and colonize and make habitable or livable. I can't think of the word for some reason. Anyway, they run into a race that is primarily organic based, and they're able to essentially be a gelatinous cube, and they can take over someone, and then they can act as if they're that person, where they remember all their memories, but then they have like a subconscious prime directive or thing that they're supposed to do. And yeah, it's, for us, it's all been metal. And this is one of those lines of thought I had in the previous book, where terraform, thank you, where we're terraforming a planet so that it is livable by us. And that was one of the words or things that I had for when we first met the others. They were killing all the organics and they were stripping all the metals, but then in that other book I'm talking about, they literally use ants and create a spaceship. And ants communicate through the chemicals they release, and they say, hey, food's over here, follow this trail, I'm leaving a scent trail, hey, this is over here. Anyway, so I'm curious to see the differencing aliens that we run into, because currently everything has been like had a soul equivalent.
And very similar in how they approach the world.
And
again, there was some of that foreshadowing there. That's where I, during my second re-listen, I shift my perspective from this is a continuation of the first three to this is the start of a new quote unquote trilogy, right? And that was one of the foreshadowing lines Dennis E. Taylor laid down, is all these species that we come in contact with so far are very similar. And we got some of that through Bridget, where she talks about how the different species kind of like interact with their surroundings and how it shapes their behavior and how they approach stuff.
Cool. And that's another thing that was different in this book, because like book one, you literally have, it felt like Dennis did his research. Dennis was like literally at those convention panels where they were talking about 3D printers being the new way instead of nano machines, and they were talking about how life is already going to be available anywhere you go because the matter has already been collecting onto the planet, and then you just need that spark or that start to get it going. Where this one, I get it, it's a little like he has freedom because it's so far in the future that he's no longer, tied to what we know. But I didn't get any of those additional lectures or whatnot, except for the guy who was dead but not dead because he was operating in the mega machines. And that was nice, the way that he incorporated it. That way it was more of a inquiry with it versus a dive into the faith directory library.
Yeah, or just little lecture snippets from the convention that original Bob. Right. So yeah.
And so I guess another big point that we have going forward is Starfleet literally said, hey, we'll give you back all your stuff. We're going to go over here, stay on your side. That's going to create some problems.
We're really set up at the end of book 4 for a lot of different tension points. Like, we have a bit of peace. Now there's a lot of different subnet groups of Bob set up, and nobody can just kind of like pop in and out. which is different, and there's the divergence there. But you're right, you have Starfleet as one of the big factions where they've kind of claimed their territory. So I wouldn't be surprised if in book 5, if we see some conflict there between Starfleet and the other factions. You
But
have, oh, go ahead.
I guess one thing I didn't think about, you could also have it be something like the Deltans, where Camelot and the other city that started up,
Yeah,
they were separate, but there was no rule that you couldn't go back and forth. And it's kind of like the Bobiverse as we know it now. Everybody's allowed to have an opinion, you're entitled to it, but you can't force your will on anyone. And kind of like 4 here, it's like, hey, I've got these problems. Who would like to help me? And it's kind of open ended. So I
right.
could see there being a bit of
Walking it back.
sure back and forth between them.
Yeah.
And
Starfleet straight up said stay on your side, though, which will be
yeah, but I'm
interesting.
not sure Bob, Bill, Riker,
Yeah.
Mario, any of the originals.
Again, I could see some territory disputes there coming up as things expand. Not to mention what happens if there are ephemerals in Starfleet's section of space and the meddlers. Say
Because
what?
they're not going to interact with them because
Well, Starfleet's not, but what happens when like Bob and kind of like the original Bob and his quote unquote faction want to intervene? Like there was already that struggle with the Quinlans. Like, is the Bob going to have to get involved again? Am I just going to let this sentient species devolve? And the ethical implications there, and like there's a point of contention there. And then like the Skippies so far are playing well with others, but and everybody has access to the same technology that the Skippies do that they get from the Quinlans. Yet I just don't see how they aren't going to have huge technological jumps. And we already know that they haven't shared everything up until this point, right? Like a lot of the processing power and the tests they've run, they've kept it in-house with the other Skippies. So what happens when they start making these other leaps and these algorithms start running where they project what the other Bob factions are going to do and run like all this different analysis and be like, oh, if we don't intervene, this could happen, this catastrophe could happen, and then it's not all shared anymore, right? Like they have information in their different subnets.
A lot of that fell through or fell apart in either book 2 or book 3. I want to say 2 for the whole Poseidon, whoever is operating the dolphin manis,
Sure.
with the whole Poseidon incident where humans were trying to take over, and they were looking at the BobNet or the Bob blogs and able to create the technology and do that. I don't see anything being widely shared, but at the same time, it's not like hidden. You have to know about it, to ask about it, to get the information. And there's just,
but it's not all going to be out there, right? Like you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what the Skippies are discovering and the advances they're making, and the power that the AI comes to be. And then not to mention, we're just dealing with one sentient AI at the moment at the end of book 4. And begins with an A, not Almanac. Amex 23.
That sounds familiar, but
he talks about how they pretty much have to like evolve an AI to get there, and there's a bit of like bootstrapping up that needs to be done.
Or I didn't know if he said that's what he did, but he said that's what the Skippies are doing.
Yeah.
Which that's another interesting point for the way the Elmec. Um. Anyway,
Yeah, Almac.
the way
Thanks,
that
Caleb.
humans come out intelligent, or they come out essentially helpless, and they have to be raised, and they're learning the language as they develop, but then end up at a higher intelligence, where the Quinlans went the opposite direction, where they come out being able to walk and fend for themselves,
Right.
but they're essentially feral. And so you get the diverging things there was very unique and interesting. But then that kind of leads in or directs to the AI, where the AI has all this intelligence and power and computing, way to do things, but it doesn't know variables and it doesn't know how to adapt. So
that was the old AI, but the Skippies are striving for a self-aware AI where
yeah.
yeah.
The old AI was a Chinese room, input, direct result, correlating lines. This is point A, this is point B. But
yeah,
in the version of developing humans or humans aging and growing up, they have access to that information. But
it's
probably say it very well.
interesting times ahead, right? It was nice going back to our roots in book 4, spending time with the original cast, getting to see a bit of the divergence there. Gosh, I lost track of all the different references in this book. Like it's nice reading a book by another super geek like Dennis E. Taylor, where you had the Big Bang reference of rock, paper, scissors, Spock.
Or rock, paper, scissors, lizards, Spock. Or that
Yeah.
Big Bang, that's Star Trek, right? Or well, okay, yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
the
Well, we had
lizard
this.
is
Yeah.
Star Trek, which then was Big Bang Theory, the show. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I got there.
Yep. We clearly had Star Trek. We clearly had Lord of the Rings and Hobbit with Gandalf and other names in there.
And then,
There,
the aunt Amy, or not Amy, the aunt Manny. Oh God, I can't think of his name. It was essentially Luke Skywalker, but it was something else.
yeah.
Anyway, we're gonna look that up. But
yeah. There was Stranger in a Strange Land, the Grok reference. Another amazing book. If you guys haven't read it, go check it out. It's an older one. What other references you got?
Oh, I wasn't thinking more references. I was thinking when book 1 came out and they invented the VR and all that, like, if it was me personally, I would have been changing my appearance. I would have been doing more like video game-esque things. I would have been, I thought it was pretty lame that they were trying to do baseball and moots. I would have been doing lightsaber battles.
Some Quidditch or something like that.
Or Matrix instance. And I was thoroughly excited that we had the whole D&D group. I thought there was quite comical, and I'm excited to see that advance.
I was about to say, like, if Dennis E. Taylor just wants to do some short stories of that stuff, like of different D&D campaigns of the Bobs, like, I'd read that.
Yeah, that plus, like, why do they have to stay Vert? Like, Vert's easy because you can program it and it does what it does, but who's not to say that you couldn't make a dragon-sized Manny that's governed by a Guppy AMI that has decision trees? Anyway, it's an extra layer. It doesn't really matter.
Yes.
That is the points that I was excited about and disappointed in 1 came to for 4.
Yeah. Good times. We did get to see a little bit of that. I wish we spent more. But book 4 was already significantly longer than the other ones, which was nice.
I might have the quote.
Okay.
Another good one. Buttons.
It is only when you do something because you believe it is the right thing to do, instead of because of any moral deserts, that you are acting morally. Likewise, it is only when you refuse to do something because of the golden rule, rather than because of a threat of punishment, that you are behaving in a moral manner.
Ah, I piped up. The golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated. Teresa gave me a perplexed look.
No, that's the silver rule.
What? Had I missed something?
There are 3 rules of behavior,
Teresa replied, now in lecture mode.
The iron rule: treat others less powerful than you however you like. The silver rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated. The golden rule: treat others as they'd like to be treated.
Okay. And then the quote goes on from there, but I thought that was an amazing. Oh, sorry.
Ooh, crank that down. Yeah, great little bit of philosophy there in the book, and we're always trying to find those life lessons and takeaways from the books we read, even when they are just escapes from reality.
Well, it's one of the things that I run into with ephemerals every day. And I'm sorry, and I understand, but why don't you understand? Where everybody has a viewpoint, and that's great, and that's fine, but no one can seem to take a step back and attempt to understand other people's viewpoints. And so it's not a debate because you're just stuck in your rut. Anyway, it's great, philosophical, and I think that is one of the things that's really going to develop this book and why people need to read more books. At the very end, one thing we haven't talked about yet.
I was wondering if you were going here. I'm glad you are.
And I can't think of her name. I want to say Teresa is what we ended up with, who Bob, while he's on the boat, ends up having the philosophical talks, and she essentially outs him and knows he's not from Heaven's River.
Yes.
And Bob goes and is like, hey, I'm going to grant your wish. And she's like, well, which one is that? You know, typical.
Yes.
And several things. So
she seemed interested in the idea.
Either A, brought up through the ephemeral way where she can put on VR stuff and interact with it. B is going to be a replicant, which is going to be able to help monitor.
My vote's for B.
Yeah, well, eventually we're going to get there. Hopefully we don't end up with a Butterworth's incident.
Yes.
And that's another like weird point. Like, you know, Bob's still not mature, but he also died at 31, and that's his basis for his replicants, where Bridget is in her 50s and has a more mature, you know, critical thinking air and mystique to her. And you know, that could be a good one.
Yes. Just, you have to
cool.
say the words, the most important words a man can say. 2 weeks away, we're going to do some fan theory crafting for Stormlight.
But yeah, I think she's going to eventually become a replicant, and then she's going to be able to help kind of guide their current AI that the Quinlans have, as well as be an additional moral compass for some of the other Bobs and their decision trees. Currently, it's all Bob, occasionally Bridget.
Well, yeah, it kind of fills out the crew a little bit, and I wonder long term where we'll end up, because we now have Bridget the biologist, we have Bob the businessman, or the engineer developer turned businessman with his company. So yeah, get a little bit of diversity there as well, which is nice. Be interesting to see her perspective on cloning and everything else. When they got off the boat together, did you have a moment of panic? Like maybe she did rat him out when they showed up before she stepped up and said, "My trunk"?
No. He had already had the heat and everybody on his tail. She clutched that very nicely, where she was like, "Oh, this is mine."
Yes. The humility there, that she didn't flex the last name until she absolutely needed to with the police, right? A true lady, otter, badger, whatever. Yeah.
Another thing, so the Pav, we kind of got a little glimpse into him, and we get to see the emotional ramifications through our ethical dilemmas of, we literally kidnapped a Pav, we knocked him out, threw him in a ship, threw him in stasis, and said, "Hey, now you get to pick, but everything you knew and loved is dead." So generations down the line, history, people or ephemerals absolutely suck at the telephone game. You know, that game you played in kindergarten where one person will whisper something to you and then you've got to remember it and then whisper it to the next person.
You're supposed to remember that? I thought you were supposed to come up with the craziest thing you could think of and then whisper it to the guy next to you.
Exactly. Anyway, it's supposed to be said the same, or, you know, as if a telephone where you, anyway.
If you're doing it right.
And is another way of like, everybody has their own processing and their way they come through, and they only know from their own life experiences. So if you say it a certain way, it's going to be translated into their processes or their life lessons. So
yeah. Didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with Goku, but then, you know, another reference there. A lot of other Bobs would have enjoyed seeing more of.
Though I didn't connect it until just now, but Bender, in my mind, was a direct correlation to Futurama, which is a futuristic race or, you know, world or time. And Bender ends up in what could be perceived as a futuristic thing, much like making jokes was the foundation and grounding point for all the crazy stuff, beep beep beep, that was going on back at Seoul. And then he also made the farm donuts, which Homer and Donuts.
Yes.
So I guess
the references.
Heard about Goku, he's going to be the one that's off training with King Kai and hyperbolic time chamber.
So if one day you woke up and you found out that you were the copy, what name would you pick? And again, feel free to toss your answer in the comments as well.
That's complicated.
Yeah, there's so many good books and animes that come to mind.
I've been kind of on a Tokyo Ghoul kick, so I'd probably go with something like Ken. You know, kind of like Ken Kaneki, because everybody translates it or internalizes it differently, but he starts off as like a generic nobody, and then catastrophic life events happen, and he's in, you know, essentially a new society, new world that he's got to learn to deal with, and then eventually he turns into his worst enemy so that he can save all of his friends, and he becomes an absolute BA just so that he can protect everybody else, but at the same time, he's pretty scary because he's literally murking people left and right so.
Sorry, the first thing comes to mind for me when you say Ken is Barbie's dream house, but maybe that's just too much Toy Story.
End up with all the luxury items.
Yeah. There's so many fun ones that come to mind, but I'd probably pick something like over the top, like from Dragonlance, Raistlin or whatever. He's basically a twin where his brother's like all big and brawn, and he's frail and weak, but ends up becoming like this epic, powerful mage. So, like in a way, like, oh, here I'm just an electronic copy, so easily could be deleted, but give me my time and I will harness the power of the moons and cast epic spells and, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
I'd have to put some serious thought into it.
Nope, you're supposed to come up with it on the fly. You wake up, you're the copy. What's your name?
Yeah.
So, yeah. It'd be interesting to see some from Bender too. I think he's going to have a very unique perspective coming back to the Bobiverse, having been like from his second cohort, right? Because the first cohort is Bill, Mario, Riker, and then he goes to Delton.
Close to 200 years. Or
Pretty
no?
much. Yeah.
More than that.
I think a little bit more than 200 years of kind of just being out of it. Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to kind of get his perspective and see where everything falls. Yeah. What else you got from Heaven's River? Like always, it's hard to do these books justice in an hour and a half. Had a lot of fun with it, a lot of potential. Yeah, I think future books will go back to more of the flavor of books 2 and 3, where we get a lot more of the big picture perspective of everything spread out.
Yeah, I don't know, because there are a lot of different directions that it could go. I think it's still going to circle around Bob because
Sure.
that's what we're connected to. It could very easily bounce around to the Starfleet side. It could see.
We didn't get much of Starfleet's side throughout this book, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like they got divided into factions, and then we just saw Lenny when he showed up to the moots or when he was flexing for Bill, right? Like typically we jump around, but we didn't get that.
You can see it from their side.
Right.
See them interact, and it wasn't until like the very end when Bob and Bill are talking and he's like, this is all pure speculation, but what if the Skippies really set up this whole thing and utilized the Starfleet to push their own agenda, take people off of the Quinlan thing, that way Hugh could port over and interact and figure out the AI stuff. And then it's like, oh, well, that's not anything a Bob would do because that's still what we're thinking from. But because they're working on the AI and it's able to figure out these different algorithms and inputs. So,
and as nefarious as it seems, in a way, it seems like the Skippies kind of helped avoid a larger crisis, right? Because originally Starfleet was planning to do something more physical,
yeah,
right?
Versus, taking over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all in all, it was bound to happen because the more and more people that you involve and the more and more people who have their hands in the cookie jar, it either goes one of two ways. too many decisions and no one can decide or have the authority to do anything, or it's
Mhm.
more like pyramid scheme-esque where you can only do something if the very tippy top of the ladder after it gets there decides that it can be done. So you end up with many options, many different things, but you cannot take advantage of them. You can't execute.
Right. Right. Um, as Caleb points out, nefarious plan with good intentions. And I think as we kind of got to see with a lot of the Bobs, a lot of them have the best intentions, right? It's just the conflict over what is the best intentions and the values on where we come down on them.
Yeah, and that's where that 3-quote rule comes into play, and I think will
Mhm.
have a big impact going forward. And a lot of the times we've been very reactionary, but
Mhm.
yet again, just back to the Deltons, Bob had an opportunity to observe them, figure out their language, figure out how they do stuff, understand what they're used to,
Mhm.
and then better assess and address it. Now, he ended up having a lot of like, I'm a Manny, I want to do this, and, you know, trying to figure it out as he goes. But
Right.
then from the Pav, like, we just had to react because others were about to take him out. From the Quinlans, like, we couldn't really get into their mindset and get them fully figured out because we were in
Mhm.
fight or flight mode to save one of our own, to save Bender. So
Right. Right.
I think with everybody expanding and spreading out, we're going to be able to better analyze them. But Starfleet's also going to want to throw a, you know, wrench into the plan.
Yeah, like they accomplish their goals in the short term, having humanity and the Bobiverse kind of put up some walls there and be a bit more independent. But um, yeah, like where are they going to stop? Especially when it comes to like we know that humanity and the Pav are just escalating up for a conflict, right? Like at the end of book 4, the Bobs are getting involved where humanity was going to claim all the local star systems close to the Pav. And so the Bobs were planning to send more of their guys over there to claim them first and build up a military presence. So like the
Which,
Pav already has some hostility towards the Bobs, and yet the Bobs are stepping in to try to advocate for the Pav. And then if you have Starfleet, then get involved saying, hey, don't get involved, Bobs. And then you just leave the Pav and humanity to conflict and go into an all-scale war. Then we're back at the end of book 1 again, where humanity is killing itself off, right?
that would come about differently. I thought that was going to come about with Poseidon, Vulcan, Romulus, like the places that we already figured out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole suck at telephone game bit and history repeating itself, and everyone.
Well, faith is ramping up again. They're not called Faith anymore, but in book 4, that was part of the motivation for Riker to pull the family and get them out of there. Because, you know, he said we've seen the far right basically muck things up too many times before. And here they were doing just that. And then all the legal stuff against the Bobs, the Mannings, and yeah. Interesting times ahead. Interesting times ahead indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, AIs that are going to be able to do stuff. Ephemerals getting on the bandwagon of Manny's elsewhere, as well as either being cryoed so that they can come back later. The whole philosophy of restoring from a previous backup. That way they don't have the current, you know, whatever, the whole replicated drift and or quantum effects. And that was something that threw me off between 3 and 4. for 1, 2, and 3, it was always quantum effects, which is hand waving because we don't know the term. And then as soon as we get into 4, it's always known as replicated drift. But then also in 4, Hugh ends up emphasizing transporting, much like they did in Star Trek.
Yeah.
As long as you're both not active at the same time, you won't show drift, and whichever one comes up first is not going to drift, and the other one's going to drift.
That creates some interesting questions, right? About the whole soul, not a soul type thing, and even challenges original Bob's bit on
humanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be a reason why Bridget ends up cloning.
Yeah, man.
Or replicating. And
that could be interesting.
They have a lot of adopted children who view replicants as possibly a good thing. And
that's
so they can
true.
kind of critique and brainwash and direct ephemerals to have a better viewpoint so that they may make them replicants.
We only had very limited exposure to humans in this book, right? Like humanity was a much bigger role in 1 through 3.
About saving Bender, Bobiverse having a fallout, and the
Quinlan's
old James Bond do a barrel roll maneuvering through Heaven's River, and to successfully fail at the finish line, and have the underlying AI Hugh pulling our bacon out of the fire.
Yes.
Yeah, that. Which I would suggest a reread of this book. At the beginning, because of the previous series, I was disappointed. But moving forward, I am thoroughly thrilled. The ending just made it all worth it.
Yes. And as always, you pick up on a lot more and the subtleties the second time around, and the third time around, and the fourth time around, and the fifth time around.
For us.
Yeah. Final thoughts? Go back, reread it. Come back, rewatch this.
And I'm trying to think what is next.
We have Dune Messiah.
I
haven't been following it super closely, but I think they pushed back Dune 2020 to 2021.
Our movie release?
Mm-hmm.
Dang it, COVID.
Dang it, COVID.
Well, I guess we're all just going to have to go into our stasis pods until they can figure out how to cure it.
There we go. Or frame jack to get there.
Now, remind me, was it supposed to be book 1 divided into 3 books or 3 movies, or was it?
I think it's 2.
Incorporating 3 books.
No, it's supposed to be book 1 divided into 2 books. So we've already done the Geek Out for Dune number 1. This is Dune Messiah, the shortest one of the Chronicles. Probably my least favorite. Going to be a first-time read for Pete. Probably a 12th, 13th time for me. But yeah, and then the week after that, going to do some fan theory crafting of the Stormlight Archive as we get ready for the new release of Rhythm of War. There we go.
Sorry.
Except for numbers wrong, because we had anyway. But yeah, Dune Messiah next week, same time, same place. You know where to find us. We're already starting to think about our lineup for next month. So hop on the Discord, talk some books with us there. Let us know if there's a series you want us to check out and geek out on. Following week, Stormlight Archive, some theory crafting, going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, what else am I missing, Pete?
That just about wraps it up. Really enjoy the Bobiverse. Sounds like he's jumping back on the bandwagon. He's had enough time for his original books to take off, and
Yes.
we're guaranteed a 5. Very
Yes.
thoroughly excited.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully here soon, though. I do know he likes to get distracted by snowboarding and everything else. So, yeah. Anyway, it's been a pleasure, Replicants. Hope to geek out with you guys again here next week.
Or ephemerals.
Yeah, see you
Anyway.
later, Ephemeral.
Bye.
Bye.